over the last year and a half, and I don't know what's what in all of this, you know, um, you know, it's possible to say that some of it just comes from, you take repeated beatings, and if you understand that you have the option to let go, slowly over time you loosen your grip on things.
Mm.
Makes me think of there's this saying in the AA rooms, everything I've let go has claw marks on it.
That's great.
And so that may be the case, but at the same time, it's a very slow process because prior to the last year and a half, it's been something that has happened so gradually that it really hasn't been much help, because I still mishandle situations. I'll still make a mess out of things and find that I'm trying to let go of something and maybe I have to a certain extent, but then there's this niggling resentment
Mhm.
that, I'm not aware of. And eventually I wake up to it and, oh, okay, so I hadn't really let go of it. There's this resentment smoldering away in the background.
Wow.
But, like the other day, I realized that after all of the really horrible things that she has said about me, at one point in time, I was hurt by those things and I kind of carried it around. And then recently I realized that, oh, it was when Susanna went to the hospital the first time, a couple of weeks back, and it was just her and I here by ourselves, dog tail hitting the door, uh,
Hmm.
that Tuesday had needed help with things. She'd somehow done something where she couldn't lift her arm. And so
Yeah,
her
yeah,
right arm
yeah,
was, yeah, okay, I emailed you about
yeah.
that. That's
About
right.
that.
And so for a day or so, I was cooking for her and getting things for her. And, until it looked like she was able to handle things on her own, I was doing stuff for her and then gradually, kind of shifting back because, my hands were full already too. And uh, as that was happening, I realized, if I was resentful towards her, I would not be able to do this, or at least not be able to do it easily, but I'm able to do it quite freely and with a sense of here's somebody who needs some help, and I'm glad to help them.
Mm.
I feel good about doing these things for them. And when that all that kind of appeared, in looking into it, I could see there wasn't any resentment. There just
Wonderful.
wasn't any resentment. I mean, and that's fairly new. I mean,
Mhm.
I've been able to let go of resentment before. I've had to, and I've done a lot of work around that over the years. But this is something that keeps happening. And so
Mhm.
in the past, that would be the kind of thing where you kind of get over the resentment, but then something comes along from that same person, that same situation, and it just kind of reignites it.
Yeah.
And that's not happening here. It's like, say whatever you
Yeah.
want about me. I don't care. I really don't. I don't care. It doesn't concern me anymore. I mean, said she was upset about something the other day and we didn't know what. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. What have I done this time?
Yeah.
And so there was a little bit of fear, but I realized, well, there, there's no need for fear. I mean, it's not going to do any good. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I'm just going to let this play out. So some of the reactions are still there, but they don't function the same way that they used to. Fear doesn't take off and then remain, where it keeps coming up, and then the fear eventually gives rise to resentment. You know, so something has shifted.
That's
All
amazing.
of that, that's what I'm trying to say is something
Yeah.
has shifted. Things are different. And, I know that we're like what I said when I started this rather long-winded um, point is that there are other things I might be able to point to that could be considered as possible explanations for this, but they haven't been very effective in the past. So that leaves only one thing, and that's the work we've been doing for the last year and a half.
Amazing. And you've come so far with that. I mean, you can see, the changes that have happened, but also it's I think the more, well, okay, the more you've done the sort of, second fetter work, that helps to loosen so many other, nuts and bolts that have been, kind of holding other issues together and makes them seem more real and have those things kind of cycle through and you kind of keep buying into them. But um I suspect like when you had said, that like Tuesday used to say stuff about you that would make you feel you would get defensive about it and you would feel really hurt by it. Generally speaking, like we've talked about a bunch of times, it's usually because it either means that we feel like we agree with that. It's hitting some nerve where we believe that thing to be true. Or it's like, there's a need for everybody to like you and to see you the way that you see yourself. And anytime we get that sort of thing reflected back to us from somebody else that actually they see us very different from how we would like to be seen, that sort of thing can be very triggering in that same way. So there's usually something underneath there. And the hope is that as you've been doing all of this stuff, those things have been getting weaker and weaker. So like your belief in you being always the bad guy or always the problem or whatever those things are, that's is that belief has weakened, all of the other incidents that would have led back to that one being triggered just don't have the energy anymore because they're, the belief isn't there or it's not strong enough to really elicit some sort of response when it gets poked. And if you start to have those experiences where you really recognize that other people's beliefs about us and perspectives of us are completely subjective and completely irrelevant, that then it really gets to where it doesn't matter what anybody says or thinks. Obviously we still want to be kind and civil and loving and all of that. We don't, but as far as their perception of us, we don't need any definition to be or any self-definition to be supported by their reflections of us in that way. And then you're just much less susceptible to those kinds of reactivities. Does
Yeah,
that sound like it supports your experience?
yeah, yeah. The only thing I would add to that is, the two possibilities were that it's gone or that it's been weakened. It's not as strong as it used to be, and it's the second one because it can still be provoked. It takes a lot more. Like
Mm-hmm.
something happened, I don't even remember what it was. Something happened in the last couple of weeks where it brought up the whole "you're the bad guy" thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was a situation where um, there was a lot of emotional intensity to it for reasons I can't recall. But I even recognized it at the time because the feeling came up, and since it's not something that happens with the kind of alarming frequency that it used to, it kind of made it made it conspicuous. Like, oh, there's that, and
Yeah.
there's this recognition that it took a lot to set that reaction off.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it does get set off, it doesn't stick around very long. I mean, for first of all, I can see that. So anyway, yeah, it takes a lot to set it off. It doesn't tend to last very long when it does come up, and it doesn't happen as frequently as it used to. I mean, even in dealing with Tuesday having to be the parent, which I've always hated having to be the play that parent role. I've always been very uncomfortable with having to play the authoritarian, not the
Yeah.
authoritarian, but be the authority, be the one in
Yeah.
charge. I
Yeah.
that I just bristle at that really in any sort
Yeah.
of context. Um, but something, oh yeah, yeah, okay. So I was having to tell Tuesday last night that, hey, we asked you not to do this. If you do it, here's the consequence. She tried to debate me on it, and I started to feel kind of irritated. And then I recognized, that that feeling was coming up. Like, okay, don't have to do that. And I
Yeah.
just very calmly told her, look, here, we asked you not to do it. If you do it, this is what's going to happen. I can't use other people as a reference point because what other people do doesn't necessarily mean that it's right or not. So this is where it stands. If you
Yep.
do this, know this is going to happen. And I didn't, even though that feeling started to come up, it didn't take hold and create anger and cause the voice to start to become more intense or more, to have, the sound of stress or to get louder. And then when walking away from it, there was that feeling of discomfort about it, but it was only there for a moment. Whereas it used to be, that would lead to feelings of feeling bad about myself that would
Mm.
last for 10 minutes, half an hour, who knows, it would last
Yeah,
for,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it didn't. It was gone pretty quickly. I realized that,
Amazing.
those feelings aren't true. Okay, there's a feeling here that says, that something's wrong with you. You're a bad guy for doing that. And no, I'm not. I needed to do it. That's what a parent does.
Yeah,
And set it aside, went about the rest of my evening.
that's amazing. So, can you say more about the sensation that would normally be, or that was there a little bit as you walked away? What
Yeah.
that was? Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it was actually before I was walking away. It was actually while it was when she started to debate me, when she started to,
Mhm.
throw out that fallacy about, well, most kids my age don't have this sort of thing. Their parents don't do that. And yeah, okay, well, this is not the moment for explaining logical fallacies and critical reasoning.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, when she tossed that out, and that's usually the point where things would get contentious, and I would
Hmm.
start to get really frustrated, and my voice would begin to get a little louder, sound kind of stressed, and it was just a sensation right here, just
Yeah.
in this little spot. It
Yeah.
might have, in a situation like that, it's hard to really give full attention, if not impossible to give full attention to what's going on. Like something happens and you can sit there and close your eyes and really feel the extent of that sensation in the body, and where it begins to kind of blur into the other,
Yeah.
just the sense of the body being alive and having energy.
Yeah.
So, all I could pick up on was there was this something just right in this area, kind of a little
Yeah.
charge. I guess it was probably some adrenaline or cortisol, I don't know what.
Yeah.
And it just kind of shot up for a second, and I started to feel that push, like, you got to do something. Like, no, I don't have to do
Yeah.
anything except step back. That's all I have to do
Amazing.
is step back. You know?
Amazing. So I'm curious, before that, you had said there was like it's when she kind of pushes back a bit or so I'm curious of what it is that is it because I know you have this uneasy there's an unease about having to express authority or having that authority, but it also sounds like there is a backlash when the authority is being challenged also, right?
Yeah,
Like
you're
you,
right. You're right. I hadn't noticed that.
you were
You're spot
expressing your
on.
authority and she was totally dismissing it.
Hmm. You're right about the first part. I don't know if it's that she's dismissing it or not. Um,
Well, she was challenging it, right? Like
she was
she
challenging it, right? But I don't know if it was, huh. I'm not sure about that part, but you're right. She was challenging it, and that provokes a reaction. That much is definitely true. Okay.
so what does it feel like when you are trying to um actually convey a sense of authority? Like in the moment before she was starting to use, logic and argue her way back out of it, what is going on mentally and in the body before, like even two steps forward before? So she says something or, something needs to be done, and then you recognize that this is a moment where you need to exert parental authority. What is happening in you just before that conclusion is reached that you now need to use parental authority? And what happens just as you're about to do it?
So let me think about this for a second. Try to kind of
Yeah,
recreate
recreate the
the
situation.
yeah. Okay, so going into it, starting with bringing this to her attention, letting her know that, hey, this is, this kind of thing, we've asked you not to do this. So going into that, that comes up in the mind, oh, that's right, I needed to mention that to her. Um, so now, I'm going to take the time now, to say something about it. And so in that moment, there's already there's already discomfort, there's
Mhm.
already feeling ill at ease, maybe feeling a bit, what's, um, um, kind of a sense of having to steel myself for a very likely reaction. Not always, sometimes
Mhm.
it's you get surprised, but
Mhm.
frequently there's a reaction of some degree. Um, and so, like I said, there's this, you steel yourself, kind of,
Mhm.
your guard goes up a little bit. How's this gonna go?
Mhm.
So that's let me see. Um, there's this, like I said, there's this discomfort in doing that, and huh, hmm. That's all I'm seeing is that discomfort, feeling ill at ease, and feeling tension, and that preparing for um, uh, the possibility of a really strong reaction.
Yeah. So I was gonna say, what kind of emotion would you put on if you had to put a label on that unease or that, that discomfort that's there, expecting a reaction or something else? What kind of emotional label would you place on that?
Hmm. And you said it's about the expectation of a reaction, right?
Well, whatever's coming up. I mean, you brought up the expectation of the reaction, so I'm assuming that is a large part of it. But if there's some other emotional label that seems more relevant, that's okay too.
Let's see. It doesn't seem quite entirely correct. It's an approximation, but it seems like it's kind of a something akin to fear.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. Um, I want to step back one more question too. So when you have those moments of, I have to step in and do something, is there a fear of what is going to happen or an idea of what is going to happen if you don't? Like what in that particular situation, what would have been the worst case scenario if you didn't step in and exercise your authority?
Um, she would have continued doing what she was doing, which is causing her to be tired the next day because she's up all night.
Mm.
So yeah, no one's going to die. Um, worst case scenarios, she's going to be really unpleasant that day because she's tired.
I mean, she is getting to the age, so she's 17 now, right?
Mhm.
I mean, she's getting to the age where she should know her own bodily needs as far as when she's tired and when she's not, and when she needs sleep and when she doesn't. And you can't, I mean, you can tell her to go to bed or put down the phone or the tablet or whatever, but ultimately it's in her realm of autonomy where she has to now learn for herself what it actually takes to, feel good and whether it's a reward for her to stay up all night texting or whatever it is or being online and then not getting enough sleep or if that actually eventually starts to kind of correct itself. I mean, it's something that she does have to learn kind of from the inside. So
Mhm.
in that's kind of an interesting instance because it's coming from where you think what you think she needs for her best interest, but it's in conflict with what she thinks she needs for her best interest at this point. Um, and her arguing back against that, kind of evidences that. But I think that there are a few things in there that are interesting. Where to begin with, there's the feeling of um, fear about potential backlash for doing this thing. What is it about her arguing back that is actually um, creates the most uh, fearful dread in you? Why is it a problem that she argues back?
I think that it's because there's, well, I put it like this. If I never, this is my hunch, my suspicion. I don't know this for a fact, but I think that if she never got angry and never blew up, um, that I wouldn't feel nearly as uncomfortable with the situation. I mean, I might still, just because there's that part of me that just doesn't like the idea of being in a position of authority.
Mhm.
Um, but uh, in this case, and it's true in others as well, that I have a pretty strong reaction to when people blow up, they get angry. Um, anything, any kind of strong uh, outburst like that. And it's not just her, it's really anybody. And I don't know if this is, I don't know if this is useful or important, but it takes me back to when I was a kid, when my dad would get angry. And when I notice I'm saying angry, not angry at
Mhm.
me,
Yeah, yeah.
because my dad, curiously enough, now that I think about it, my dad, I can't remember him, with the exception of one time when I was a kid when he spanked me. I cannot recall him directing anger at me.
Mm.
Even when I'd done something that, most people would say, well, he brought it on himself. It's understandable why he'd be angry. So what we're talking about is somebody just getting angry at things like, I remember pretty much anytime he had to work on his truck, he'd wind up getting pissed off. You know, things weren't working out the way he wanted or need them to, and he'd get angry. And so he would get angry at other things. But starting it as early as I can remember, I always internalized it. I always made it about me. Not
Yeah.
sure why. Um, and so it seems like that's the thread that runs through all of this is anytime anyone gets angry, I somehow personalize it.
Right.
And um, and I think the fact that it's my own daughter, which is really funny because that's just a label, uh,
Mhm.
that a label with an abundance of belief attached to it,
Mhm.
um, that that seems to give it an added wrinkle.
Which is, I mean, it's interesting from a variety of different angles. One of which is also that getting angry about anything was also your go-to for a long time.
Oh
That
yeah.
was your reaction.
Hmm.
So I'm wondering if there's any aspect of where, and there very well might still be a bit of where you're personalizing when other people get angry, but how much of seeing her get angry is triggering your own unacceptance of your internalized anger that you have had for years and have worked to weed out of your repertoire?
Hmm. It's hard to answer just right off, just immediately in the moment. It seems like that would require some kind of
Yeah. Yeah, it's
spending
more
some
of a,
time with it. But I don't find it hard to believe that that's the case because when you have this idea that anger is shameful and
Mhm.
bad, that if someone else does it, um, then you're going to you're going to you're going to see it through that particular point of
Yeah,
view.
absolutely. Yeah, what I'm going to say isn't meant to be a generalizable rule. So I say this kind of to everybody who will be watching this. We're not saying this is a way of like, justifying your own anger and reactivity as being a productive, healthy, fine thing to do. But on the flip side of that, what we do want is to be able to have the kind of equanimity where even if somebody is yelling and angry, we can see that it is just this reaction happening there that doesn't have any sort of hooks into us. Obviously, if they're getting angry and belligerent and violent or something, we need to get out of that room and, do what we need to do.
Right.
But just in general, if your kid is just getting petulant and angry and yelling about something, how that it's interesting for us to see which alarm bells that sets off in us and why,
Yeah.
as a tool for our own introspection. But it really has nothing to do with them. And again, this
Right.
is to say that it's also a great thing to just allow them to yell at everybody and, teach them that that's the right thing to do, because that is also setting up some unhealthy habits in them that,
Right.
aren't going to serve them in the long run either. But in terms of our own personal, journey of introspection here, it's super interesting to see, is it like in your case that this is bringing up some inherent, you know, like guilt or shame of myself for having acted this way in the past, or my own inability to love and accept the fact that there is part of me that also responds in that way, that feels like it has that in its repertoire, because it has. And, how much of it is just our fear response about, them taking something out on me, them, obviously she's not being physically abusive, but in what ways does her verbal abuse or just complaining, what exactly is that bringing up in you? And it's something where you can see what needs your attention internally.
Well, it seems to go back to that the what I've already
Yeah.
explained to you about um, my dad getting angry and me personalizing it, because there was always this sense of um, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And
So
yeah, yeah.
well, I was gonna say, so what does that personalization feel like now when Tuesday is, you know, not accepting your rule of law, and she's disagreeing in some way or getting angry about it? How does that feel personal to you? Like physically, mentally, what is actually happening that gives it that sense of personal nature?
Well, there's this bodily sensation, which I guess is probably, it's akin to the startle response,
Mm,
kind of a, oh no. And then there, it's hard to pin down. There's just this sense of there's something wrong with me. They wouldn't be acting like that if, hmm, hang on. There's something, boy, this one's kind of defying or resisting being rendered in language. I wonder if it ties back to the whole you're the bad guy, you're the problem, because there's this sense of if if it weren't for you, meaning
mhm.
me, Darrell, then they wouldn't get upset. That somehow it's something about me that is the reason why they're expressing that, acting it out, direct, or I guess that's the thing, is I see it as being directed at me, even though many times it's not.
Well, without going down the road of looking at um, other times when it has seemed to be, story-wise directed back to me, or that maybe it is. I'm really curious about the direct experience of the moment when you feel like it is personal, it is becoming personal, that it is about me. Like, what specifically does that feeling of I am the bad guy, it must be because I'm here and saying this thing that they're reacting that way? There's a thought, and maybe it's a verbalized thought that comes up. I don't know. But what does the actual experience of that feel like? Like what I'm getting at is there's a feeling of the truth of that statement that is different than, the statement that the house is on fire right now when you can clearly see that it's not, right?
Mhm.
But both of them would inspire a certain feeling of stress, anxiety, fear, something. But you can see with your own eyes that the house is not currently on fire, so that one doesn't have any meat in it. Why is it that that idea, that thought, I'm the bad guy, they wouldn't be acting like this if I wasn't here doing this thing. I must be doing the wrong thing. Why does that feel true?
Mm. Well, and I'll mention the bodily feeling just because it
Hmm.
seems to act as a support for this other thing. So there's
Absolutely.
this bodily feeling, and then there is this uh, assumption of the truth of some kind of belief. In other words, there's a belief, and there's the assumption
Hmm.
that that belief is true, that and the belief being that um, somehow somehow I am, there's something wrong here.
Hmm.
That, huh,
Yeah.
yeah, so that didn't expect that. Kind of trying to, relive just kind of an amalgamation of all the various times that she's gotten upset at me.
Hmm.
And that just seemingly out of nowhere was the phrase, "you're no good," which I feel like I need to qualify that because
Hmm.
I heard that from my mom a lot.
Hmm. So what does it bring up when you hear the phrase, you're no good?
It just brings up a feeling,
Of?
hmm, rejection, hurt, um, kind of a sort of betrayal. Um, in the sense that, especially when, it comes to people closer to me, whether it's Tuesday and Susanna or, someone else, a friend, that they're rejecting me and they're saying that to me, even though they're not. That's how it's being interpreted. And I was counting on them to not. I was counting on them to. Um, I'm not sure how to express this. I guess I was counting on them to accept me
Hmm.
and to um, be for me whatever role they are, whether it's my mom or Susanna or a friend. That I was expecting them to be there for me in that way.
Hmm.
And when they reject you and you're getting the message, you're no good, then that's a betrayal of that kind of relationship, I guess.
Can we ever really expect that from somebody else? That they fully accept us and provide for us what we think we need?
Well, the second part of that, no. The first half, what was he said? Can we ever expect them to? What was it again?
Fully accept us.
Ah, okay. I don't know. I mean, with some people, no. I think it kind of depends. I mean, I've known some people who have mothers who really do just kind of unconditionally accept their kids regardless, even even in situations where from an outsider's point of view, I look at it and go, at the very least, you should be letting this your kid know that they're way out of line here, you know.
Yeah.
But the second half, obviously, that's unrealistic. And the first one, I'm not really sure. I think it may kind of depend on the context.
Yeah. I mean, it's really wonderful when we luck into finding somebody who does seem to unconditionally accept us, but it's something where we can't be dependent on that for our wholeness and our sense of security.
It's funny you should say that
Why is that?
because it's not exactly the same thing, but it's very related. Susanna has really been struggling. She's been having a lot of health challenges and has been
Yeah.
feeling pretty rotten. And of course, when somebody feels like that, they're not quite themselves.
Yeah.
And I've been taking care of her, quite heavily. I mean, doing almost everything for her recently, which is fine. I don't have any problem with that. I'm glad I'm able to do it. But
Yeah.
I was feeling really troubled by it and trying to figure out what was the source of that troubled feeling. And I realized last night that I have a dependence on her to be okay so I can feel okay.
Yeah. Excellent insight. So, can you, for a moment, just try this and see what happens. If you bring to mind that idea that, you're not okay, you're not good enough, there's something wrong with you, whatever phrase is the most has the most juice for you, and feel what it inspires in the body.
Hmm.
And then I want you to try putting your hand on your chest. Just put your hand over your heart and say something along the lines of, I accept myself. I fully accept and love myself.
Let me get
Like that.
in touch with
Yeah.
the first one.
Feel the, yeah, something like that. Find whatever phrasing works for you. But I want you to feel the discomfort, because we're not doing this to drive out the discomfort. So, you bring it in, you start out by provoke it with whatever line works for you. You feel the discomfort in the body. You're accepting the fact that it's there. It's okay. But you're letting yourself know that it's okay. I'm safe because I fully accept myself. All of it.
Okay, so see if I get this correctly.
Mhm.
Um, no, repeat it to me again. The phrase you wanted me to repeat.
Something along the lines of, if this works for you, I am safe. I fully accept and love myself as I am.
unsafe, fully accept and love myself the way I am.
And this is taking into consideration all of the possible repertoire of sensations and emotions and experiences that are here. It's extending a welcome blanket or a welcome mat to all of it.
Hmm.
Prandtl always says we have to be able to go into every room of the house and be okay with that. And this is what we're talking about. It's really being open to all the things that are here are okay to be here. This is your personal experience of a world. And there's no judgment. There's no pushing away of any of it. There's no moral values about this one is acceptable and this one isn't. It's acknowledging that it is all part of this totality of experience, which is not in itself personal. If it feels personal, it just gives us a moment to investigate. It, it is asking for us to look into what does it mean that this particular thought is personal when another isn't, or that this particular sensation is personal when another isn't. What does it mean for something to feel personal?
It's a question. I don't know that I know how to answer that.
Hmm. And it's not a verbal answer, and probably not a verbalizable answer. It's something to feel into your experience of right now. The sensation in the chest might feel personal, but I venture to guess that the feeling of your feet on the floor right now feels less personal. It's
Hmm.
more just sensation. But some sensation, for whatever reason, seems to have more identification built into it than others. So it's really interesting to investigate the sensation that feels personal.
Well, the closer in it is to the head and the chest, the more it seems to create that sense.
Often the case. Yep.
And that's not all that surprising because um, we tend, at least here in the West, we tend to, um, or it's extremely common for people to believe that they
Yeah,
reside somewhere in the head and chest area.
completely. So if you take that assumption off the table and you're here with just the raw experience of the sensation itself that happens to be in the chest or head, without the assumption that this is me coloring that experience, or that this is personal, or that this is something I need to identify myself with, or judge, or get rid of, or any of that, what does it really become if we're just present with the raw experience of it? And can we find anything about it that makes it personal?
No, it's just the assumption, the belief that this is me.
And how for you does that assumption or belief show up?
How do you mean? What do you mean by show up?
Well, if you feel at first like you say, I'm not good enough, and you feel that sensation that seems to support that as being true,
Hmm.
there's a feeling of belief around that idea that I am not good enough. And then you feel the sensation. Where is it that the belief or the assumption that it's the case, how is it showing up? Is it because there is a verbalized thought that goes through the mind that says, I'm not good enough and I know it's always been that way and I believe it to be true. Are you seeing mental images that seem to somehow correlate or uh, endorse that belief? Is there, what is the actual experience
Okay.
of having a thought about it?
Um, it's funny. I should add, we should be doing this because this is something that's kind of come up in the last 3 to 5 days. There is sometimes there are mental images,
Hmm.
and there was one just a minute ago when you were talking about, what is the belief, what is the assumption, and there was very briefly a mental picture. Um, there's another thing that I think the best way to describe it is to use the Buddhist term sankhara.
Hmm.
It's, kind of pre a pre-existing idea in the mind, and it doesn't even, at least from or speaking from my own experience, it doesn't require language. It's so solidly it's so solidly constructed through repetition over the years that it kind of shows up there's kind of a sense of it in the mind that this is me or mine. And then the other thing is just this bodily sensation. It's that sense of here-ness. And now with eyes closed, it's a little bit different because it's still here. Um, but with eyes open, it seems to gain some strength because with eyes open, there's this sense of that is out there or that is over there. I am here.
Mm.
So it gets really shored up by that bodily sense and the bodily sense in tandem with the sense of something here, which is also mental pictures, um, and an idea or a belief. So I guess you could sum it up and say physical sensation, mental activity, and mental pictures.
Excellent. It's interesting because like that idea of there being something that is just so under the surface, understood and unquestioned. Um, it is very possible that, there is something in the way the mind works that does just have those undercurrent of assumptions. But the beauty of doing this stuff is that we can start to kind of undercut them or undermine them by pulling apart those experiences, like you just said, being with the physical sensations that seem to be either aliveness and presence or something physical in the body, something that seems to be an image in the mind versus a thought in the mind versus um, smell, taste in the mind versus something that is actually seems to be appearing outside of the body. Taking all of those individually starts to leave less room for um, that pre-existing belief to gain traction. Because even if you have an idea that, um, for instance, the Earth is round, you have the idea in the mind. You've always been taught it. Everything seems to be reinforcing this to you everywhere you go. You keep hearing about it. If you close your eyes and you actually look for a world, no less a round world, but look for a world itself, that starts to break down because all of a sudden now there's no world to be found. No less a round world or a flat world or anything else. We find that that belief has to be either verbalized to be known, felt in the body to be known, seen in mental image to be known. It needs to be expressed in some way, or else we don't even know that we know something. So when you have the belief that I'm not good enough, or I'm not okay, or I'm the bad guy, that is being felt or seen or heard for it to really be known, because it's pointing to somebody that is just as non-existent as the world when your eyes are closed. Right now, the idea of a planet is just an image in your mind. It doesn't point to anything real. You can't possibly know it if somebody hasn't told you that it exists. Because with the eyes closed, you can't feel it. All you feel is little pressure points, you know, floating in space. You can't see it. You can't hear it. All you hear are just discorporate waves of sound emerging from someplace you can't really define. You can't smell it directly, taste it. You have no indication that there is a world outside of your mind. And the self is exactly like that. Whatever it is that is being pointed back at as the one who is not good enough or not okay, should be different, who's causing problems just by their being there, that is just as much of an uninvestigated assumption as the world when your eyes are closed. So, in the moment when it feels like there is something personal here, we want to look back at who is that belief even talking about? What could it possibly be pertaining to? That is the unique individual cause of all of these experiences, events, emotions, outbursts, everything. Where is the one at the center of that who is having any sort of say over these things showing up or not? And in doing the loving acceptance practice, we're allowing all of the things to show up without judgment so that we can recognize that there is no center to that experience. It's not that there is this one individual being who is in there who needs the acceptance or love, though that might feel good. It's really about recognizing that there is no center to the experience whatsoever. Can you be loving and accepting of all of these individual parts, these clouds of experience that just arise out of nowhere and go back into that same unknowable space? And is that okay that they come and go?
Hmm.
We have acceptance for that whole process as opposed to any idea that there's an individual being in there who needs that acceptance. So for you right now, if you bring back to mind one of these situations again that seem to be, you know, one of these verbal triggers, what feels personal or relevant about that idea when it's showing up?
About which idea?
Any of the I'm not good enough, there's something
Hmm.
wrong with me, one of those. Feel it again, feel whatever shows up, and then check in with all the internal senses to find what is actually the center of that thought that it's pointing back at. Where
What is it?
is the identification located?
Hmm. It seems like that sense of identification is um, somehow the bodily sense,
Hmm.
which, there it seems like there's two sides to that. One, there's the bodily sense, um, but there's also that um, sense that the bodily sensation is here relative to everything else,
Hmm.
which shores up the idea of that being someone.
So with your eyes closed, is there anything else?
Mm, well, no. I mean, other than the belief and the
Hmm.
assumption that there are other things, but
Yeah. And
obviously I cannot actually point. Well, I don't know. It's kind of a weird one because on one hand, yeah, there's with the eyes closed, there's really not any way to say anything to say that there's anything out there. But at the same time, there's also a sense of whatever this is. I mean, if you want to say it's a hand hitting against a table, or if we want to strip the labels off of it and just say there's this sensation that seems to be out there, or the sense of um, um, someone's butt being in a chair, which you know how that's going to be understood. That's going to, well, see, there is someone there.
well, there is a unification in that though, of where if there is an idea of a body and there is an idea of a chair, which first of all, with the eyes closed, you actually can't say that either really exists outside of a thought, right? You need to have a
Right,
mental image that's showing you a body and is showing you a chair and is kind of mapping these two things onto the experience.
right.
But even if there is an experience of a body and a chair, the two are defining each other, right? So they are in cooperation.
What the sense of the chair and the sense of the body?
The idea of a body and the idea of a chair, they define each other. You can't define the body if you don't have a chair in which like we would say the body is sitting, but for the body to sit, there needs to be a chair that is in cooperation with that body to create sitting in this
I
moment.
see.
And we're defining that the body ends at the point that the chair begins. That the rest of the body ends at the space where the air begins, and the air ends at the space where the skin begins.
But if we strip all of that language off of it, set it aside, it's all just kind of one
One,
big thing.
exactly. It is one ever-present moving of atoms or, space experience that has no clear delineation when we don't have that mental image or verbalized contextual overlay that seems to be creating those artificial lines of demarcation. The actual experience is just of moving sensation. We really can't say more than that, right? It's just some form of vibration and parts that seem more dense, parts that seem less dense. The idea of me in here versus something else that's out there has to be created in the mind by there being a feeling that seems to be located more closely to this than to that. But where is the center of this? Like, for instance, which are there some sensations that feel closer to you than others?
Hmm. It begins to seem that way, but then, there's the understanding that, okay, well, that it's requiring an idea, it's requiring language, possibly a mental picture
Hmm.
to do that. If I take away the take away those things, then no, I mean, because as we've been doing this, there was a train going by.
Hmm.
The trains may be it's not even, the tracks are not even a mile from our house,
Hmm.
and can be heard quite clearly. But still, there's, conventionally, normally a sense of distance. But in taking that off, that sound was as close as the sense of um, any of the parts of the body or
Nice,
any of the other sensations that normally would be understood to be closer.
nice. And even in those physical sensations, are there some of those that seem to be closer to you than others?
Only if I use language and mental pictures.
Hmm. Excellent.
I mean, because I started to get this itch on the lower lip.
Hmm.
Just automatically the processes, take off, and like, well, that's closer. And then, well, hold on a
Hmm.
minute. What happens if we um, don't uh, somehow describe or define this? Then no, it ceased having any relative distance more than anything else.
Excellent. So then try opening the eyes. With the eyes open, what gives you a sense that there is something out there that is further away than the sensations that are right here?
Same thing. Thinking about it, defining it, delineation, um, and then of course the
Hmm. How close was that?
it's tricky. You really have to make sure that you don't get um, give into or buy into the ideas about what it is and where it is.
Yeah,
Um, because if I do that, then it'd be, well, it's down the hall. But
yeah.
without that, it was as right here as anything else. But the sense of vision, of course, opens up the I don't know if it's a belief. I'm not sure what to call it, but that thing that um, creates a sense of depth and distance.
Hmm. Again, I find it much more helpful if we also take in, instead of looking directly focused on one small thing in front of us, take the
Hmm.
periphery side to side and also top to bottom so that you have the widest view, the sort of most flat, diffuse perspective of the world as it is. And when you do that, where where is the close that seems to be here felt? Like where are you separate from the visual field that's out there? If the visual field were pointing back to some seer, where would that be located?
Where would the seer be located?
Yeah.
Okay, here's the answer. It's not a good one.
Is
Here.
where's here? Is it is it is it someplace locatable? Does it feel like it's actually focused into a point?
It does, the body sensation shores that up. The just the sense of a body metabolizing energy and
Hmm.
whatever contributes to that. Um, but it's funny when you asked where's here, the first thing that came up was, well, not there. Which, that becomes so circular, it's ridiculous. Because they both depend on each other.
They very much do.
Yeah, you have to have here
And
to have there, you have to have there to have here.
exactly. Um, Do you feel like there's a physical sensation in particular that seems to provide the here that creates the there?
Um, it doesn't seem to be anything particular or specific. I mean, I say that, and it is in the sense that people would say, well, your body sense is specific, but it doesn't feel as specific at this particular moment. But yeah, it's that body sense. It's that, there's temperature, this, whatever it is all the various things that go into making up a sense of there being a body.
Hmm. See if you can look at the wall or whatever's in front of you and feel those bodily sensations, that sort of life presence sensation. How can you tell that that sensation has the shape of a human body and is not the shape of the wall in front of you, is not the feeling of the wall in front of you? Another way of coming at it is sort of expand that feeling of life out because it's not bound by skin. It's bound only by a mental image of what we think a body is.
Right. Well, and that was the problem. The answer to that question was it's all thought. It requires thought. How does I forget exactly how you said it, but you know, how does the body have, how do we know it has a shape? Well,
Mhm.
without thinking about it, it doesn't. It's just there.
Exactly. So drop into the sensation itself, be as fully absorbed in that feeling of vibrant life that we take to be a body, just in all of its amorphous, moving, shifting glory. And still looking at the wall in front of you and whatever objects might be in front of you, see if you can map that sensation onto the wall and all the objects. Can you really tell that they aren't the same, that you're not actually feeling the vibrating of the wall or any other objects? Why do we need to enforce that limitation on what we think we feel and where that barrier has to be?
Well, it does begin to blur or blend,
Hmm.
and perhaps given enough time could really go pretty far with that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this something that comes up that seems to kind of resist it. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's fear,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not. It's hard to say what it is beyond just saying it's kind of an idea, or a sense that finds that kind of hmm, not quite scary, but maybe kind of. unsettling or uncomfortable.
Hmm. That's perfectly okay. It's okay to feel that. Can you can you allow that fear sensation to be there and recognize that it doesn't need to go away? You can be with that and you can still feel that openness of sensation becoming the world around it that was once held to be separate. Because that fear sensation is not separate either. It's not its own thing. It's still just
Hmm.
showing up as a part of this body life sensation. And that feeling of fear, if we label it that, is often the gateway to some new way of seeing. There's usually some big insight or some shift that's on the other side of that. It's like the gatekeeper.
Hmm.
Just welcome it. It's okay. Just let it be, let it blend, and stay with the sensations in the wall. Don't expect anything, but just relax and allow whatever is to just be the way that it is without needing to define it or make it into something else. We can start to even realize that the visual field is not separate from the felt sense field.
Hmm.
They're part of the same display. Even the definitions of one sense field versus another is a distinction overlaid by the mind. It's not inherently true of our most raw experience. It's really important just to remember to stay relaxed, open to everything, and expecting nothing. Because that's the way that the world just starts to appear. With all of our expectations, we start to make it into what we think it should be. And this is how we can even have experiences where other people are behaving in ways around us that we once felt to be really uncomfortable. But we can witness them from that place where it's just an appearance that is appearing the way that it's appearing. No judgment, no expectations or wants for it to be different. No idea that it's about me or personal or even relevant. It's all one huge, interrelated, interconnected play. And you can feel that words arise not because you are making them happen, but because they are being elicited in response to some other words that you've heard, some other experience going on. And they only arise because of that. And those bring out other words that you hear, some other expression by what we take to be somebody else. But it's because everything is a dynamic interplay. Nothing is really isolated. It's all one giant flowing process that we put these artificial labels and boundaries on. It can be helpful at times living in society, but it can also be really problematic. So we have this antidote way of living, the opposite, where we can clearly see that everything is an interplay. Nothing is existing on its own. Nothing is created on its own. Nothing can survive on its own. Just as sitting only happens when there is both a body and a chair, life only happens when there are all of these interplays happening at one time. What we take to be us only happens because there is such an interplay of so many different things happening all at once. Trillions of cells and biological processes, and the whole environment in which everything is happening. So we drop down below the identity level and rest as the one creation, always replaying, making itself new every moment. And it's a good reminder when we're back in our normal life. We can check in and see how many artificial boundaries we're creating in this moment. How much of what I think is real right now actually is, and how much is my assumption and boundary and artificial thought creation. Essentially, how much am I imagining the world to be into existence the way that I think it is? And can we just drop that and drop all identification with it? We think ourselves small, and we're actually just as big as the entire cosmos. Where are you now?
Nowhere.
Perfect. See if you can move around a bit and still maintain that nowhereness, that lack of centrality.
Hmm. So this is something that deepens with practice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Mm-hmm.
Was able to go a long way towards what you're describing, but there was still sort of this sense of something here, but it was in the background. It was much
Yeah.
reduced.
Yeah.
And I could begin to there the sense of that life energy or whatever it is became less centralized,
Mm-hmm.
start to get a sense of that's coming from the wall or as part of the wall. Or the other one that happened was that bodily sense was the same thing as the light coming from the lamp.
Nice.
Um, but
Yeah.
couldn't go all the way into that fully.
Mm.
There's still so anyway. I'll just have to make time to do that.
Okay. It's just helpful. It's not something that we have to live through all the time or something like that, but it's really helpful to keep deprioritizing that sense of personal located identity. That here-ness. Um, the more throughout our day we can get used to dissolving that and dispersing it, the easier it becomes to live without attachment and to live in that equanimous space where we don't take things personally. Things don't seem as serious and directed this direction.
Well, it, it's one of those things that if you can make time for it, whether that's while driving down the road,
Hmm.
going somewhere in the car or walking or whatever the case might be. In other words, it's not something where you have to carve out an hour to go sit by yourself, without any distractions every day. Um, that if you can do that, it'll start to get easier,
Yep.
start to get better at it. It'll start to deepen. And then once the system gets that message over and over,
Yeah.
it will become more a part of the kind of basic understanding or
Yeah.
sense of things.
Absolutely. Yeah, the only caveat is I wouldn't do this kind of thing while driving because it can lead to accidents, but pretty much any other time.
You said you wouldn't do it while driving because what?
It can lead to accidents, but pretty much
Okay.
any other time. You know, we,
Yeah,
we
yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
it can mess with our depth perception and our ability to see, like our you can hear just having walked through it, our what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry, spacey. Um, reactivity time, and like it,
Uh,
it can be slowed down, and we do have to make sure we're in the proper state while driving, as opposed to,
sure.
um, but in other times, most other times, it's really helpful.
Well, that came up because, and this has been going on for 5 or 6 years, that when driving, that whole Douglas Harding, Richard Lang headless experience comes up spontaneously,
Yeah.
pretty regularly. And then that happened the other day, and the thought that showed up was, um, well, if that's the case, because it seemed to it seemed to kind of bring up that whole idea of um, um, things becoming two-dimensional, losing the depth perception. And
Mm.
so, while going to and fro, it was, um, there was an attempt to try to see if that couldn't be pulled into it, and could
Mm.
kind of start to begin to get it, but it never really uh, happened with any depth. But so that's why it came up, because that was just a couple of days ago. But I
Yeah,
guess
yeah.
if it had really happened with any depth, uh, I think I probably would have known already that doing that while driving is probably not the best idea.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You could definitely rent somebody or um yeah. Yeah, because it can be really jarring if things go two-dimensional, or even just the kind of, you know, coming closer kind of thing. Even if it's not that you can't fully tell how far something is, or that your built-in muscle memory of being able to judge, because we pretend as though we really know when we're driving when to apply the brake, and when, exactly how much pressure to put on the gas pedal, and exactly how much to steer. We've learned that over, countless years of driving, to where it's just the body knows. We don't have to think about it.
Right.
If we did, we would be completely useless. We would be it would be like being a beginning driver all the time, where you're like, there's a reason. Um, but so as long as like the perceptual field is working the right way, then all of those innate judgments of how far to push down the brake pedal and when and all that, they're online. But we can see where like even if you like are used to driving your car all the time and then you have to drive a loaner car or somebody else's car and their brake and pedals are of a different, they're more sensitive or they're less sensitive or whatever. It can be like, you don't know how to drive the car anymore because all of those inbuilt muscle memories aren't really applicable to it. Uh,
Right.
and it's because you don't really know how much, it's this innate process that's happening. So if our visual field starts to get skewed in some way, then all of our previous learning of how far away we have to start braking or whatever doesn't work either. So um, all of that needs to kind of readjust if we're visualizing something in a different way. Um, so that's why it's really helpful to, you know, do these things when not driving to
Right.
take care.
Well,
Um,
having said that, I will say that driving is a really great place to get a sense of and be able to clearly see the emptiness of self.
yeah, yeah, it is. It is. I think it's, relatively fine to be doing like first vetter kind of stuff, though it's only because some people, when they have like a first vetter experience or they see through the self, sometimes there are bigger experiences of, sixth fetter and eighth fetter that fall with it. And
Mm.
we don't know how big of an experience it's going to be, which is why it's always a bit risky to do it while driving. Um, as a passenger, it's great too, though. Uh,
Yeah.
that then it's really, really wonderful because you can play with all the sixth fetter perceptual stuff of are you driving towards the scenery or is the scenery coming towards you and you're stationary or lots of other things that you can do in that regard, but much safer. Mhm.
It's funny that it's kind of amusing that we're saying this is all being said because it was, I was driving last July when that happened, where the kind of the linchpin of the self um, uh,
Yeah,
got seen through, you know.
yeah,
So, all
yeah.
right. So that's how it worked in this case. But um,
And it's
public
funny.
public service notice.
Exactly. Exactly. And I had years and years ago, I had a one of those first big recognitions of the no self thing was ironically also while I was driving, but I was listening to Alan Watts, and it was that I heard him say for the first time that what we take to be the self is just a persistent muscular contraction. And while I was driving, I felt for like what that was, and it was just like, oh my God, like it really clicked that like that's true. But thankfully, it didn't lead to any, bigger experiences. But there was like it was a really profound insight in that moment as to what he was talking about and how much of the sense of self is derived from just feelings of density in the body. Um, but yeah, it is again, PSA, please do not try that at home because it is unpredictable. Um,
What uh, an amusingly Western way for things to happen. People are waking up while driving.
completely, completely. It's so true.
Uh,
It's something so many of us spend a lot of time doing. So,
yeah.
and it does seem like, well, this is time. I might as well just be, you know, uh, like being present with my experience or investigating whatever. And so,
Mhm.
I get the draw. Um, again, being a passenger, really, really good for that. Um, yeah, yeah,
So it's it seems like the key piece to that is um the peripheral boundary.
Mm.
pulling that in, seeing that I don't know what you call it, peripheral perspective. That seems to be the thing that really kind of um, unlocks that lock, so to speak.
Yeah, I find that there is something different, and I think it's has to do somewhat with our brain function that when we feel like we are directly focused on one thing in particular, it's not just our field of vision that shrinks down, but we tense up a lot of other muscles, and it puts us in a very different mental posture where it seems like, you know, I am here focusing out on this one particular thing, scrutinizing it, having some sort of inner experience that really gives that feeling of it versus me being the observer. Whereas if we go peripheral and then also, wide on top and bottom, it opens up. I mean, it changes, I think, our whole um, mental state as far as what we're taking in. We're also less like when we're tightly focused on one thing, we very much make it into an object. It's very easy. Like there's a microphone right there, and if I look at intently, it really seems to be a microphone at first. But if we take it out to the peripheral vision, it's just one more shape and color amidst this whole other panorama of shape and color. It loses a lot of its importance and a lot of its definition. And then we start to get that feeling that we can't tell necessarily where the center is in comparison to that. And then I am always directing people to feel into the sort of periphery of the body so that you're also not just feeling into that core central channel sensation, but also feeling out beyond, first you feel what you take to be the skin, but then what's out beyond that? Can you feel beyond the boundaries of the skin? And so as you're taking in the peripheral visual world, you're also taking in the peripheral physical sensations. So it feels wide and open, and there's less of that core density in the middle of it. And then even with the auditory field, which is I think probably the easiest one for us, or one of the easier ones for us, because it is already seems rather spacious, spatially arrayed out there. But see if you can just take in that sort of external, far out, open perspective around it where you're not tightly focused on sound, but you're just taking in the kind of loose panorama of it. And all of that starts to just open up our experience of and decentralize whatever that feeling of self is that's in the middle of it.
It's interesting because I think you're already aware of this because we've talked about it before. And I don't remember precisely what he has said about it. It's been several years since the last time I read the book, but I know that Chula Dasa
Mm-hmm.
made a really strenuous point around the usefulness of that peripheral awareness.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I
So it's
completely
definitely
agree.
something there.
Completely agree. I feel like I've read something about the neurology of it, but I can't remember now what the difference is between the the spotlight focus versus the floodlight focus. I seem
Mhm.
to recall that it's actually activating different networks in the brain, but I can't remember specifically now. So
Huh, interesting. And it's kind of curious that in all of the writings, all of the things said over the centuries in Buddhism, that there doesn't seem to be any evidence of it having been discussed uh, or coming up at all. It seems like that's a relatively recent development.
yeah, it might be. I do feel like it's more in the like Zen and Taoist perspective. I'm not sure that they talk about it peripheral quite as explicitly, but I feel like that's what's often being pointed to in that. Like even when you're sitting with shikantaza, it's not about sitting with this, central locality of focus and being. It is that kind of peripheral sense of just allowing everything to pass through. And
Right,
again, I'm not sure it's using the same wording, but I think that's
right.
what they're really going for.
Yeah, I can see that. That would explain, or that would seem to kind of make sense out of the. It comes up a lot in Zen that spaciousness, the openness.
Exactly. And having that sort of not knowing open mind drops that centerpiece out. And there is just a more open, expansive, pervasive sense of being in that way.
It reminds me of something that happened to me once years ago. This was before all of this stuff had ever shown up in my life. Um, Suzanne and I were talking about something, and she got really upset with me. And when she got upset with me, just for reasons unknown, all of a sudden everything dropped away. And it
Mm,
became, and of course, I didn't understand it at the time,
yeah.
but everything dropped away, and it was that wide open perspective and the sense of someone there uh, either disappeared completely or to a great degree.
Yeah.
And she was upset with me, and it was that energy and the things that she was saying were just passing through. That there was nothing, there was nowhere for him to get a foothold, and
It's so
there was
interesting.
no reactivity, and so I was just able to talk to her, and the whole thing calmed down very quickly. You know.
It's so interesting. And that might have been because you said that was before you started doing any of this stuff.
Hmm.
So, I mean, it could also have been like a dissociative state, like you had like a PTSD kind of reaction and like went into a dissociation, which ironically gave you a very similar experience
Yeah,
to,
because it's I don't know if it was that or not. I just know it was very open and very relaxed,
yeah,
and everything was fine. Everything was present. There wasn't anything that was bad or good, or
yeah,
it just simply was.
it's
Uh,
amazing. We never know what is going to trigger anything. And,
mhm.
I think there is some truth to the difference between uh, destable derealization, depersonalization disorder, and awakening is like whether one causes more pathological problems in our life or not. There is because that's generally kind of how it's defined that like they are problematic to people, whereas people who are doing this kind of work have a lot of similarities in their experience, but without the suffering attached, without the struggle for, regaining that sense of self or that sense of perspective and realization. And like I know I had had for years because of the anxiety, I had experiences where everything got really shifted where I felt like I wasn't in control, that it was just all this stuff going on and feeling like I could hear myself talking, but it wasn't me talking, and I had no like, it was a little bit scary because I didn't know what I was gonna say, and you can feel the body moving, but clearly like it was just kind of doing its thing.
Mhm.
And that happened for years on and off, and that was definitely very stressful because I didn't know why it was happening, and it was happening in periods of some sort of stress. So it was, a, a, what do you call it? A sort of defense mechanism to dissociate from, the stress of the moment, which was not terribly healthy. But I can see looking back now, the similarities with the exception of the confusion and anxiety and kind of wanting for it to go away to what it feels like, now from the no self perspective. So
Well, I think it definitely is a matter of whether or not first of all, having some sense of framework or context for it, and then whether or not you're open to it and you're accepting it, let alone seeking it. Because I know that was what you described, was what happened to me that evening in the playground with Tuesday, that going all the way back to our very first one of these
yeah,
that
yeah,
I related. And, you know, I didn't have the kind of understanding of it I did now, but it was. the freedom that came with it, it was so relaxing that it was I would have felt like anyone would be crazy to not want that.
Yeah.
But that's not even a particularly great example. Um, Susanna, when she started having panic and anxiety back in, I guess it was 1996, um, she was also experiencing derealization and depersonalization a lot.
Yeah.
And she made a comment, it's been in the last 6 months or so, that, I still try to make it a point every day to really investigate the moment of decision.
Yeah.
So it's pretty clear that, and sometimes it even has a quality of sort of an epiphany about it, and
Mm.
seeing that no one's making a decision, it's happening on its own, and
Yeah.
pulling the pulling the rug out from underneath the idea of some sort of agent who's um, deciding things.
Yeah.
Um, so to say that, to say something about getting her to understand, like, well, who would do that anyway, and how? It's
Yeah.
just going to happen on its own. It's just causes and conditions.
It is. It is. And it's like little things, every time that you have a talk, it's leading one more conditioning, it's adding one more condition to the web. So it's like we're basically just constantly putting in the teaching is just putting in other perspectives or insights that hopefully will get taken in and assimilated by her and create some new experience on the other side of it or some new behavior on the other side of it. But ultimately it's just about like trying to provide the information and provide even more than the information, it's really providing the modeling of the kind of behavior that you're looking for and seeing it get taken in.
Right, which is all the more reason to be able to handle these sorts of things skillfully, as the Buddhists like to say.
Exactly.
I was going to tell you this real quick just
Yeah,
to
yeah,
finish up that idea. So when she was having all of her panic and anxiety and the derealization and depersonalization, it was scary as hell.
yeah,
She had really, it created a lot of stress and suffering for her to have those experiences. And then recently, in the last 6 months or so, she's been working with someone at LU, and of course, she's been to the Finder's course several times and what have you. And so, she was doing something that brought that sort of perspective about. And she made the comment that, it's so funny that for years I resisted this sort of thing. Uh,
mm,
I didn't want it. It was scary and uncomfortable, and now I'm actively seeking it.
I know.
Hang on a sec.
Such a change of perspective.
Come on, hurry up. Let's go. Come on. Come on, hurry up. Uh,
Yeah, it
um,
really is that change of perspective where um, we have context for it, and
mhm.
largely when we're doing it out of a psychological need, it's because it's happening as a defense to keep us from, experiencing something that is so uncomfortable. And the the irony is, I guess you could kind of make the case that it's similar to what we're doing now. It's just doing it, willfully and knowingly going into it, um, by being with what is so uncomfortable and just investigating our experience. We start to find that there was really nothing there to begin with, and it changes our way of functioning. But it's it is kind of funny that there is such a similarity that most of us get into this stuff because we are trying to escape suffering. And the reason that people, have DPDR and all that stuff is because they're, trying to unconsciously escape suffering. And so we're like knowingly escaping suffering. And then when we're experiencing the DPDR, it's like we're just unknowingly trying to escape suffering and keep ourselves safe.
Interesting, because what winds up happening is the mind brain system winds up going that way for one
Uh-huh.
reason or another. I mean, not every, obviously, there are people that live their whole lives and they're completely oblivious to any of this.
Totally.
But at the
Totally.
same time, it seems to kind of point to this idea that um, human beings are wired for this,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, there's something to it. And I think it would help if we had any idea what this even is. Yeah. Like,
It might. It seems to me that it's enough for people to find out about it or to know that it's there and to begin to move in that direction.
oh yeah. But I mean, to know whether it's, like an innate thing for us to for the mind to go in that direction. It's like I don't know which part of the biology, if it's that creates that kind of drive, if there's something else, if
Huh.
it's because we're being pulled naturally towards, because I mean, I think maybe part of what it is because we don't have any concept of self or other or any of that when we're born. So I
Right.
think we take it as our like primordial state because it's how we entered the world. And I think that's why when people experience those, it's like something I remember from childhood, or it's like a place I remember, it's like when we have these experiences, it's putting us back in a similar space to where we were when we were babies. And um, it could be that it's like, the mind's way of going back to that out of this uh samsaric confusion with all the self-identity and all that stuff. It's like it knows where that safe space is that it's pulling back to, and it's like it is effectively going back to a much earlier way of being, but with certain wisdom and new abilities that we have as adults who are then able to kind of bring in the best of both worlds, so we can have this fully adult human experience, but also tempered with the wise, open expansiveness of our infancy.
Yeah, coming back to that wide open expansiveness of that time, but now with understanding of what it is and the ability to interact with the world and do so from that place so that we can do it in such a way that we don't create a lot of problems for ourselves and others.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of like we needed to create that sense of me, them, space, distance, separation, and all of that stuff in order for, you know, a functional being to exist and a functional society to exist. But it's overly, it kind of got out of hand. It's like it became too strong, too defined, too believed in. And so we're kind of paring it back to where it's just, the useful parts without all of the unnecessary beliefs and assumptions put on it that create all of the suffering. So it's like just enough self to be useful, but not so much that it causes us, all the stress and strain and misery that it usually does.
Right. So, in kind of summing it up, um, going back to what we were talking about earlier about the being afraid of reactions, people getting angry at me,
Yeah.
being upset with me. Um, how 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 do I work with that? How do I work on unraveling that or releasing it?
So, well, I mean, many different things. So, one, you can still continue using all of the reparenting stuff, all of the feeling in the body, doing the positive affirmations like we started with today. That sort of thing is good. But what I would also really recommend is in the moment when you recognize like Tuesday or somebody else says something and you start to trigger that old belief, if you can in the moment, or if you can't, then just afterwards, see if you can hold the go into that peripheral feeling around that tension that's there, around that feeling in the chest or wherever it shows up. See if you can invoke that peripheral sensation, and then from that space, see if you can find where the identification with that is supposedly found. So you're standing there, she says something to you, you feel really, really bad about it, that this is all about me. You breathe, you feel that space around the sensation. So it's not just that, that's not the only thing in the world right now. You feel the space. And if there's a feeling that, like, oh yeah, this is me, this is my problem, this is about my history, where in this peripheral expanse, including that density in the chest, where can you find the center, the person who is being talked about as the one who is problematic? Like, if you remember being told when you were a child that you were a problem, where is that child now? What about your experience right now actually has any relationship to that thought or to memories that show up about a previous child who had that experience? Where can that be found now? You can't find him anymore, right?
Right.
Little Darrell is gone.
Yeah.
What experience is right here, right now, that still gives you the feeling that there is something here which is consistently, persistently wrong or bad? Where is the center of this whole cloud of experiences that is ever changing? You may say that there are proclivities that happen, there are habits that happen, there are some, state repertoire that are more likely than others. Like, uh, if you go to see a band, right? Maybe your favorite band, but they might have a couple songs that you're not super happy with, right? And they're not your favorites, but you go to see them in concert, and there's a possibility that one of these two might show up. Not your favorite, but still you can sit through them, right? That is their repertoire of possible things. So we take that identity of like that band with that repertoire of songs. It's like the way that we experience this. Like, this is just a metaphor of a band, right? All of those people that are in a band, the band doesn't actually exist, right? Like, Radiohead doesn't exist. It's a collection of different people who are all collaborating together to create something bigger than the parts. And there is a repertoire of things that when you go, they will probably play certain things, but you never know. They might also play a cover. It might be completely unexpected, right? This is just a conglomeration of all of these different parts that produce a relatively predictable-ish repertoire of experiences. In those, you don't know. Some of them might be a little bit less predictable than others, but where in that can you find the Radiohead, right? Like, where in that can you find the band that you think is there that's at the center of it? There are, band mates of all the cells in the body and the biological structures of the brain and chemicals and all of these things that are going on. Without them, none of this would be a thing, right? None of this would all fall, the body would fall apart, right? Like,
Right.
this is just a big cooperation of bacteria and cells and all these other things which are creating this body that we take to be me. But without that, where is the centrality of that experience? Where is the name Darrell that we think is there? All right. Where do we, when we're talking about the band sucking, or the band being so great, they're the best band in the world, we're talking about this kind of amorphous coming together of parts to create one experience that is not, it's not, um, there's like a band can be around for 30 years, and some periods of that band's history might be amazing. Some periods of the band might be a little bit less so.
Mhm.
But we kind of paint that with one big conceptual brush, that whole thing is the whole output and uh discography of that band. And then we do the same kind of thing here, forgetting that that label of me is just as much, the band might have multiple different band member change ups. It could be there's one original member of the band left and all the rest of them have come and gone and been interchanged. Very much how it is here, but we keep that label of that band on this. This is me. This is the same me that was here when I was 5 and he got told that he was bad. Well, no, there are no original band members left in this band. It's just the name that has gone on. It's like one of those uh there are some of those like bands from like the 50s that have been like, you know, gone through so many that there's no original band member in there, but they still tour as though they're the real band. That's
Right.
effectively what we are, right? You're touring under the band name Darrell, but not a single member of that band that sucked back in the day is still there now, right? This is a totally fresh new experience of a band that is not bound by the repertoire or by the quality of the playing that was happening back when you were 5 and 10 and 15, right? The band was a different band. Same idea here. This is just a collection of experiences that get a conceptual name or net put over them. And we don't need to bind ourselves to that. It's just a matter of looking into right now, where is the band? Where do I see the reality of this unique thing which seems to be in the center of the experience, which seems to be the thing that was the center of the experience when I was 10? Can you remember that? Was that really there? How can you tell that there's anything central here that was the same that was there? And it's really about finding what it is in this moment that seems to be the thing that all of that past belief is talking about. Again, just to belabor a metaphor a little bit more, it's like if you're like, the band has been around for 30 years, you just joined the band today. People are telling you that you suck because that band sucks. You're like, I was not on any of those albums, right? Like, I have never played with this band before. That is no reflection of me. I just showed up here.
Right.
I happen to be playing in a band. Do not put any of those past members on me, right? This is totally a new experience for me. It's that kind of thing. Don't be defined by the previous band members who are no longer in this band.
Okay. Hmm. Of course, it doesn't help that she, um, and we talked about this before. I remember what you said. Um, it gives an added kick that she reminds me so much of my mom and my younger sister.
Which only makes sense because again, we are creating everything, based off of our expectations. It makes sense that we see people based on similarities to people that we remember in the past. You're not seeing her how she actually is, right? Like
Right.
she's not one way reminding you of this other person. You are seeing her through the lens of these other people because you are literally creating so much of her. Your experience of her behavior and all of that is being created by you in the moment, and it's being filtered through all of those formative experiences of what a woman is like, what a person is like, what a family member is like. All of those things that gets put then on everybody that you see. So you're never having like a clean experience of what she is or what Susanna is or anybody else. It's like you can see how these things start to kind of uh, just get overlaid on them. And of course, they're the things that pop out. I'm sure there are so many parts of their experience that also don't uh, remind you of your mother because
Yeah.
that doesn't fit the narrative. It doesn't
Right.
ring the same way. So, but they're really good ways for you to look into anything that you feel like, it reminds you of her in like a bad way or something.
Hmm.
It's a good way for you to get back in contact with that. What you are seeing in them, how does that relate to you? How is that something that you still need to meet and accept and love and come to grips with and find if you can interact with it a different way, you know?
Yeah. Well,
No
I'm about to
worries.
find out.
Yeah.
I'm about to get
Good
some
luck
more
with that.
practice.
Good luck
Yeah.
with that. I hope it goes well. All
All
right,
right.
awesome. I hope to
Talk to
see
you
you
later.
then. Good luck with everything.
All right,
Bye.
bye.